Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Insight webinar, Redefine Customer-Centricity for the Ultimate 2020 Marketing Strategy. My name is Jasmine Keys, and I lead the marketing chapter of the Insight Group at Reuters Events. I wanted to take this opportunity to introduce myself to those who I am yet to connect with, and it's also really exciting to have such a passionate group of marketing leaders joining the webinar today. We're really excited about having 1,300 registrants, so this is our biggest webinar yet. So thank you for joining us. Now, to set the scene for the webinar and start the discussion, we're going to open a question to the audience via a poll. You'll see this pop up on your screen in just a moment. All right, there it is. And while you're answering this, I'd like to introduce 4 representatives of the Insight Marketing Summit. These leaders will be sharing their insight at the 2020 meeting on May 14th and 15th at the splendid Hilton San Diego Resort and Spa. So we have Martin Leitner, Executive Director, Global CRM Engagement, Activation Analytics from Estee Lauder. Martin won't be joining us at this particular event, but will be have his boss, Doug, joining us, which is very exciting. And Maytal Rassaman, Head of Global Marketing at Roche, and Will Caddy, Head of Brand Strategy at Reddit. And finally, I'm joined by Alan Hart, host of the Marketing Today podcast, an all-round marketing expert who will be leading the discussion with me today. Alan, tell us a little bit about yourself. We're really excited to have you on the webinar here today.
Well, I'm excited to be here. Yes, I do podcasts by day, and so a webinar is a little different because there's feedback, there's questions coming, but I'm excited about the questions that will be coming soon. I do consulting for brand strategy and the like, but the Marketing Today podcast, I would encourage everyone to check it out. And I will be in San Diego, so I hope to meet everyone in person.
Very exciting. Thank you, Alan. Now, I'm just going to send over a link to the website for the summit so that you can check out Alan and the speakers who will be there and see what really we're going to be discussing. Now, this is an audio-only webinar, so you can peruse that while you're waiting. But before we start the discussion, let's take a look at this poll and what customer centricity is to our audience. So we can see that there now. Now, Alan, is this what you would have expected?
Uh, changing the core of how we interact with our customers, playing the customer. I think the first one for sure, I expected to be high, although I would have expected it to be higher, frankly. Um, didn't realize that we were, pushing towards the interaction part as much as just putting the customer first in all of our decisions. So that's interesting.
I guess what it could come down to is the last choice really is focusing on like a total flip, really
Yeah,
changing the core of it. Whereas maybe we've always been putting, or for some of the people online, maybe they've always been putting customers at the forefront of all decisions.
that's true. Yeah, maybe the next generation, if you will, customer centricity.
Very exciting. And what about our panelists? Is this something that you would have expected from a poll like this? Martin, perhaps you have something.
Hi everybody. I was a little surprised to see the results. I would have thought that more people would have voted for number one, but maybe that's already embedded in the thinking, and so the other ones kind of like follow sequentially as a result of it.
Yeah, and I guess I definitely put in the putting customer experience before marketing in as a bit of a black horse. It's an interesting concept that I have heard a lot of people talking about customer experience before marketing. I wonder how many people on this webinar are working in customer experience area or are more focused on that than kind of brand marketing or social. So if you are working in customer experience, do send a message through, and because I'd love to kind of see what the audience is made up of, maybe sending through where you're working within the marketing department. and I'll keep an eye out for those coming through. But let's move on to our first question. So obviously, in 2020, the world's biggest brands are putting the customer at the forefront of all marketing decisions, like we've established. So Mattel, what do customers want? How are you solving their unmet needs? And what are the pain points?
Thank you, Jasmine. And yes, you know, it's interesting to see the poll results, because it actually goes right directly to this answer. So what do customer wants? Customer wants to engage with your brand, but what do you want to do with that? That's the question as a marketer and as a company. You know, customer have different expectations, but you really, as a marketer and as a company, need to understand your customer. And when I say you need to understand your customer, I mean in an intimate way. You need to understand their needs. You need to understand their desires. It's way before beyond the demographics. It doesn't matter if it's B2C or B2B. It's really human to human. So what they want is what you need to provide value for, and your value proposition needs to meet this need. Then you can build the trust, and when you build the trust, then you deliver on your promise, really, to address this unmet need. In the old days, customer-centric, you know, was the exact interaction with the product. But today, to have customer-centric approach needs to be as a business goal. So it's actually the 15% that said that marketing experience need to be before marketing, because marketing experience is a business goal. It's not only marketing goal. It's not only the marketing department that decides on the customer centricity and the customer experience. It's the whole company. It's not confined to the narrow interaction with your product or service. It's much bigger. So in a way, it's surprising, but not really, even though, you know, if you have like a big systemic understanding of how this thing works, you know, and where do you meet the customer, then it makes sense. So that's how we meet today customer needs. We understand them, we build the trust, we provide value, we provide continuous value, and create an experience that is beyond the narrow interaction with the product.
Well, thanks, Maytal. I'm excited because we've got so many different industries represented by this panel. You know, Maytal, you with Roche, and I imagine a heavier B2B focus than, say, Martin at Estee Lauder. And so, Martin, I'd love to know, you know, what do your customers want, and how are you trying to meet those unmet needs?
Thanks, Alan. Well, this was already a great start, I think, from Maytal talking about her viewpoint, and I think a lot of these overlap really with how we see the world, because it's still consumer-centric marketing. But so as I think about consumer marketing, ultimately the expectations of the consumers are changing, and they're changing really rapidly, particularly in the last couple of years. The bar gets constantly raised, and with that, as marketers, we have to adapt to those changing demands of the consumer. And we're required, I think, really to focus on three different areas. The first one is all about hyper personalization. The second one, which is kind of connected to it, which is how do you create true relevance for the consumer? And then third, it's about real time, from a reactive as well as a proactive perspective. So it's about creating this exceptional experience. For us at Estee Lauder, it's really all about the high touch experience for the consumer. And obviously, depending on where you are as a company, how far along you are on this consumer-centric transformation journey, the realization of all the work that needs to get done in order to get closer to meeting these ever-changing consumer demands could actually be quite paralyzing. And this is really actually not what you want to happen. So if I could just lay out, if I think about this from a more like process perspective, there are 5 steps that you just have to think through as you lay out your life cycle journey, your consumer journey, from awareness to acquisition to conversion, all the way then ultimately to loyalty and advocacy. In order to create this consumer experience, you have to think about your journey, and then what is the vision that you want to have associated with that consumer relationship? What are the values that you want your consumers to take away from? What are the methods that you want to leverage in order to realize that? What are potential obstacles that could get in the way? And then obviously, as an analytics guy, one that's really near and dear to my heart is measurement. How will you actually measure and know when and how you succeed?
I love those 5 steps. That's great. Will, I want to bring you in before we move on to another question or another topic, just to get your perspective, because at Reddit, I mean, you're very different than Estee Lauder and Roche. I'm curious your response to the same prompt. You know, how are you meeting your customer needs?
Yeah, certainly. I'll actually go back even further than just my time at Reddit. I'll go all the way back to my first jobs when I was a teenager and working in retail, waiting tables at restaurants and the like. And the adage back then was the customer is always right, and that was hammered into us. And I think that represents the old paradigm that we're talking about. It's interesting to see in the survey results how the experience and the customer being at the forefront were both secondary to how we interact with customers. That really shows the evolution, because what is happening today is, in that time back when I was working the register at small town stores or waiting tables at those restaurants, our only real interaction with the customers was when they walked through our door. But today, the opportunities for interaction are so widespread and are in so many different environments that as brands, we really need to think about who is our brand in different contexts when we're meeting customers where they are at. And that can be very, very challenging on social media. You look at Twitter, for example, and how in the QSR space, Wendy's, Burger King, et cetera, they're really crafting this irreverent voice that matches the conversation that exists there. And that's something that really kind of playing in with jokes and just sort of that kind of culture is pretty unheard of in terms of interacting with customers going back even as recently as 10 years ago. For Reddit, we, in our own environment, when we make substantial changes to our business or our platform, and we want to have that conversation with the Redditors who identify as this community, they have that name that they share, we're not just communicating with them on our platform, but also out there in the world on other platforms. But even when it is inside of our platform, there are different community contexts that we're going to have that conversation. So we shipped the redesign of Reddit, the first substantial overhaul of the platform in about 10 years. We did that in 2018. And we brought the conversation to the UX designer subreddit, and we brought our design team to them and said, here are the design reasons, the principles that we're following. Let's talk about that. We went to the moderators subreddit, where different moderators gather up to talk about what it is like to manage a community. And we had that conversation with our community team so they could see how there are some tools that were coming in. We talked to the groups of Reddit that were more interested in policy, the groups of Reddit that were more interested in just the culture of the site. And in each of those different spaces, even on our own platform, we had to approach the conversation with different representatives of our business and a different voice and different intentions, and really meet them where they're at and be comfortable recontextualizing our brand identity and our brand purpose for those different spaces. And I think that is very indicative of what we saw in that survey result of, we're thinking more than ever right now, not about the experience, not about necessarily just keeping the customers at the forefront, but how we are interacting with them entirely.
That's fascinating. Jasmine, do you want to set up this next topic for us?
Yeah, I think it really is great to have all of these different industries and quite different roles as well. The level of this discussion is fantastic. Thank you all so much. So next up, I'd like to I'll ask Will another question actually on top of this. So we're delving into presenting relevant, valuable information on your customer's channel of choice. So where are they searching for your brand? How can you be more readily available? How does your content need to vary based on channel? And overall, how do you make it consistent but not generic? A big question that I know all of the panelists will have insights on. But to start with, Will, do you want to kick us off?
Certainly, yeah. The focus really needs to be on the core brand DNA. What are the principles that the brand operates from? Why does the brand even exist? What is it doing for the world? What is it doing for people? And when you sit comfortably in an assured identity at that level, then you're able to allow your brand to be recontextualized, remixed, recapitulated based on these different environments. And there's a lot of play that can come from that. And the brands that have the most success in social media are the ones that are willing to engage with that level of play. Going back to QSR, for example, you look at Kentucky Fried Chicken, now KFC, and the way that they're working with their brand is they're making everything from, Colonel Sanders, pillows to jewelry, and, running these campaigns with, Sean Astin doing Rudy 2, where he's the Colonel now. Really, really fun, irreverent stuff, but showing up in different communities in ways that is relevant to those communities. You can also be a lot more narrowly focused in terms of the value that your brand or your product is bringing to particular communities. When we had Under Armour come to the Reddit community, for example, they were really focused on the runners, the running communities that we have in various cities. And so what they did is they invited these communities to partake in the process of creating something valuable for themselves, basically crowdsourcing what are your secret running routes in San Francisco and New York, other cities like that. And they gathered up all the intel, used their resources as a brand to create a very nice looking polished guide with some of the unknown best secret running routes, and then in turn gave that back to the community. And so what they were doing is really interacting in these spaces in the same way that a user does, where you're coming in, you're listening, you're learning from the culture of what makes this whole community tick. And then you're finding, all right, what is it about who I am that I have to offer that can be of service to the community? And then presenting that, finding it's adopted, and then that's how you earn your membership into these different spaces. Now, through that process, again, you have to really lean on who you are from a brand DNA standpoint and allow the community to tell you who you are to them and then work with that. And when you follow that blueprint, the results are very, very exciting in terms of brand affinity, but also in terms of motivating action for catalyzing action from at the level of community rather than at the level of an individual. So this is a playbook that we've really been crafting and have been expanding on and are going to be digging into even more going into 2020.
That's great. Well, Maytal, I want to bring you into this conversation because your customers are very different, and just curious about the channels that they're choosing to interact with and how you're kind of engaging with them in that regard.
Yes, it's very interesting. As I was listening to Will, I was thinking, okay, there's so many similarities between B2B and B2C. If you think about the consumer and if you think about the buyer, or, it's a different language how we use it in B2B. But really, what we all want to do in the B2B arena and also in the B2C is to have H2H, human to human. So the discussion of how you actually meet your customer, it should be at the human level. Nowadays, we see the blurry lines actually between B2B and B2C. It used to be that it was very clear that it's different. However, the buyers, and the different personas that we're dealing in with from the B2B world are really people on the other side. So we really need to understand the complexity of what they need and when they need it. And it's not that much different anymore from the B2C. And I want to give you like a couple of examples of two different companies from Silicon Valley. One is Waze. Waze is the crowdsourcing navigation app that was sold to Google for $1 billion. And why they were so successful in their value to the customers and what they provide and how they become 50 million users in 3 years in 2013. Their tagline and their motto and their value was outsmart traffic together. They built a community. That together thing, the together that they put there was building a community. And then outsmart traffic is really the need for people to commute faster, right? And so the app would give them like a different routes and different different notifications if there is any kind of obstacle on the road, or if there is any kind of any policeman that's going to stop them or something like this. So the hazards on the road. But just by saying outsmart traffic together met those customers' needs and created this virtual community that I think Will was talking about, create the sense of community and actually meet them when they need that. And the values that they created was way more from the interaction, beyond the interaction with the app. Because when you got to your destination much faster and you had this 3 minutes that you saved, it's a lot. It's a great experience. So the way they met their customer need is way beyond the app of the navigation. And another example from a work from my previous work at Oracle, which is the master of B2B, is also, if you think about it, how it's close to the B2C. If you look at their tagline, it used to be, they just changed it like recently, but it used to be hardware and software engineered together. So as much as it sounds very B2B and engineering, it really is tackling one of the biggest problems that B2B buyers think about. It's the integration of, oh my God, I'm getting another system. How does it work with another? And if I want this, and if I buy only software, it doesn't work with the hardware. So really, the promise is that it's going to be integrated, and that's a huge need. So the master of Oracle is the master of B2B sale. There's a lot to learn from this company, because the way they met the customer needs all the way from the beginning to the end-to-end marketing was amazing, because they found channels to actually go with this promise. And they built the whole content strategy and the whole value chain of the company based on this integration and unmet needs. So that's like putting the customer in the center and actually talking, although it sounds very engineering, talking in a human voice and create this also a community that works together, that engineer together, that if you have that, it's all working for you. So, so this actually shows us that the expectations of a customer, it doesn't matter where they are, is really for empathy for their needs and really kind of get the content that they needed when they needed, beyond actually the interaction with the software itself or with the application.
That's great, Maytal. It looks like we may have a question from the audience, but I also want to make sure Martin has a chance to chime in. Maytal, what you were describing sounds a lot like what I've heard other people talk about, is trying to create your platform, if you will, and you can't see my air quotes around that, to platform your business, meaning to create an ecosystem where you, your suppliers, your customers, and you're hosting the party, if you will. And that can be in an offline or an online environment. We were talking about both, it seems like, but I've heard a lot of interesting stories about people trying to blur the interaction space between offline and online. An example would be a Shake Shack, which is a quick serve restaurant chain that's trying to move from in-store experience to digital experience. What does a Shake Shack digital experience look and feel like? But that's where customers want to interact with them. And I think figuring out the right touch points and how to blur, if you will, these different interactions across mediums is no easy task for anyone. But Martin, I don't know if you want to chime in first, and then we can start taking some questions.
Happy to, Alan. It's great conversations, great content. So what I would say is, going back to how Will started off, you need to be sure you understand the brand DNA, like who is your consumer, what does she want, and then you start from there. So the channel conversation sometimes tips a little bit where you try to force your consumer into liking the channel versus using the channel to meet the consumer's needs. So I think as marketers, we sometimes tend to get a little carried away by new shiny tools and technologies and platforms that are available to us. And that then could be an actual distraction or a stumbling block that hinders you in actually strengthening and improving your relationship with the consumer, which is what you ultimately want to do at the core, right? So channels have specific functions and a specific purpose for why the channel is in place. So Twitter is very different as a channel compared to Instagram. How you use email versus text messaging in your consumer interaction is very different. And so now when you think about the overall experience, you need to think about what the limitations and what the strengths are of each of those channels and create this like overall experience. And again, this could be daunting, but you start with where the core of your consumer base is interacting with you with, and then you start layering on top the other channels, again with an eye for consistency across the channels without trying to be generic, because the channels actually sometimes don't even allow for that level of generic treatment.
That's
Fantastic.
great,
Yeah, thank you so much, Martin. This brings us on to another question. The question from the audience was actually answered by your question. So fantastic, thank you for that. The next one really is about cultivating a customer-centric workforce. So, and maybe we should have started with this because it really is a foundation for customer centricity. But how are you ensuring your workforce are driven by the customer's needs? How are you creating a closed feedback loop internally and improving the overall customer experience?
Martin, you want to jump in on that one?
Oh, happy to. So I would say that probably on its own could be its own webinar episode. So maybe something to do in a future series to go real deep on. When I think about this, like overall, I would say employees get typically very excited about being consumer centric. It's conceptually really easy to understand what you're after, and of course to get behind on, right? But it still tends to be a bit more challenging to actually make it happen. Like any other change or transformation, it's a pivot to this consumer centricity that sometimes feels a little painful, because you're obviously used to doing things the way you've done things, and you feel and you're not too familiar with this new approach. So when I think about this, to get a little more specific, I think about this topic in two different areas. So the first one is around measurement, and the second one is around adoption. So again, measurement, you need to know what what you actually, what the it is. What are you trying, as you think about consumer centricity, what are you trying to measure? What are you trying to improve in order to see your progression? So is it the number of active consumers do you have? Is it the level of spend? Is it the retention rate, et cetera, like engagement levels? Ultimately, you will end up, as you think about really the critical KPIs, you will end up with a select few that, and then also some auxiliary ones that will be the driving force for developing dashboards and customer reports that shows the business now through this new consumer lens. Coming from having worked in retail that grew as more like your traditional brick and mortar, where it was about selling products first and foremost, when you started layering in the consumer dimension, it got a little difficult for people to wrap their head around. Well, now we're not talking how many units we sold, we talk about how many consumers bought the units. And when you start creating these bridges for those different reports and show them in parallel, that really helped in the transformation. So depending on where you are in your journey, there are different techniques that you can leverage in order to make that happen. It's also important that you start really simple in the beginning, again, depending on where you are in your journey, and you don't try to get overburdened with the complexity. So as you start building different dashboards that measure and show your success or like your challenges or your opportunities within your consumer-centric transformation, what's important is that you continuously actually re-look at all the dashboards and all the reports that you're pushing out, because like sometimes we slip into this set it and forget it mentality, and maybe there are new data streams that are available. Maybe you are shifting gears a little bit and you reprioritize some other area. It's always really helpful, not only for your own resources to free up resources, but also for the receiver to make sure that you communicate whatever is the most relevant and the most insightful reporting. The second thing about adoption of consumer centricity, I think there are a few items that I just want to like quickly hit on, and then I'm sure others have great input on this as well. So first, adoption is really driven by education. Education sits at the core. So how do you roll out this transformation as you think about consumer centricity? What forums and platforms do you use? How do you prep the content? And who starts rolling out the content across the organization? And depending on your size, this could be quite simple with just one town hall, or it could be quite complex in a very large global organization. You also need to find ways to find incentives to actually tie the consumer-centric viewpoint and making the consumer the center of the discussion. So tying it to people's incentive structure, and also making sure that this content actually gets leveraged in leadership meetings is going to be critical. So you bring the consumer more and more to the forefront. And then lastly, there's obviously a small measurement component as well, where you can look internally and see how many, how big the adoption is, how many people are accessing what dashboards. That will help you identify, as well as the training material, of course, and this will help you identify gaps in your reporting structure as well as your learning materials, and it can help create some improvement as well.
That's great. So thank you so much. Will, I'm curious to get your thoughts on this as well. when I think about the Reddit community, it's a very active community and in its own regard. And so I'm curious how you're cultivating a customer-centric workforce there, and how you're providing that feedback, or a closed loop system, if you will.
Sure. So we've talked about platforming your brand. We've talked about community. The structure of community is something like the layers of an onion, where the level of engagement, the level of commitment varies from layer to layer. And at the center of that onion is your company. It's your workforce. It's the people that have given their lives and careers over to this brand. And that's very much how we operate at Reddit. So, for people like myself, I've been using Reddit for 10 years. And so my journey into the company was actually a journey through those layers. And that is not something that is unique at the company. A lot of the people that are at Reddit have, earned and credentialed themselves in their respective trades, but also really have an intimate understanding of the experience as a customer, because we have been the customer. And so in that layering of the different customers in our community, just to be very specific, the way that we look at that at Reddit is we have our volunteer moderators, who are the ones that uphold all of the communities that they create, and they're extremely valuable to our business. And we have a team that's dedicated to working with them. Similarly, we have our advertisers, our brands, and they are investing their money and their businesses in using this platform. And we have a specific team that's dedicated to them as well. Then, the next layer out, we've got the people that are regularly posting and submitting content to this platform. We have a team of engineers that are thinking about them, looking at the metrics of the behaviors in terms of, are they staying engaged? Are they posting more this week or less? And again, another team dedicated to them. And then even further out, we have people that aren't posting, but people that are just commenting. That's their contribution to the community. A team of engineers that are looking at that. Beyond that, we have people that are not comfortable posting or commenting. They are voting, upvotes, downvotes on the content, on the comments. Sometimes they're just idling. They're just, drive-by traffic, or sort of lurking in there in these threads just to learn some information. We also have a team that's dedicated to them in terms of analyzing their behaviors and making sure that they're having a key experience. So for our workforce, it's really about understanding that our company is an embedded part of our community. We're not separate from the consumers. We are part of the same ecosystem, part of the same experience, and basically matching up different specialists and teams to be looking at the segmentations of the different customers that are getting closer and closer, or further and further out from that core of, just full commitment to the brand and full commitment to the experience. This is a really important approach for being able to measure things like brand love, brand affinity, brand trust, because it's not a single signal. There's not a monoculture that defines the community around our brand. It's a different experience for different people at different layers. And so our benchmarks for their behaviors needs to be different depending on where they are in that journey. Our expectations about whether or not they want to move through that journey are also important as well. And we build our strategy, we build our products around that understanding.
Thank you so much, Will. I've been talking to Will and all of the speakers about what they're going to be sharing at the Insight Marketing Summit, and I'm really looking forward to hearing you delve further into that and share a few more examples of how Reddit is creating that community and how it's benefiting brands. So now we will be taking questions now, but I'll give you a moment to answer them, and I'll share a few quick updates on the San Diego meeting. So we're lucky to have Maytel, Will, and Alan attending the conference, and this week we're offering a limited number of post-event reports, which are valued at around $1,200. We launched the promotion yesterday, and when I checked just before the webinar, there were only 9 left. So yeah, we're really excited to kind of share those. And Alan, you've been to the event before. How did you find, collating all the information? There's so many tracks, there's so much information.
Yeah, and it's impossible to go to every single one. just because there's always two that you want to go to when there's tracks involved. Yeah, I would encourage folks to check out the opportunity for these post-event reports. They're hugely valuable. I know you also make at certain levels the recordings available from all the sessions, and those are
Yeah, that's right.
certainly invaluable. And you know, and just the discussions. I mean, engage. The event is structured in such a way that you can easily engage with panelists or speakers. And I encourage anyone just to take that opportunity. I will give you a personal tip. The best way to engage with a panelist or a speaker is to find them before they go on stage, to avoid the long lines after they come off. So that's my tip. That's my gift for you. Try that out at the next event.
Fantastic. We've actually just sent through the code to get the upgrade on your pass. So if you are able to register, do jump on board and register now. Now we're going to dive into those questions. So we've got one come through, and it's kind of actually related to the poll that we had at the start, which it's just so how can we change the core of how we interact with our customers? Can you give some quick tips, or like 3 quick tips from a few of the speakers on what simple tasks you can do, or simple strategies that you can put into place in your office that can actually change that core?
I
Not
can
everyone.
I can talk about like a little bit about that. How can we change it like in 3 different things? So first of all, in the B2B, you need to understand what are the critical moments of touch points of really understand that on an intimate level. I know it's a complex buying cycle and it's a complex landscape of personas and different people, but you need to understand those critical moments, those micro moments where they matter, moments that matter. So when you understand that, you know what to provide, what kind of content to provide. The second thing is, when we talk about change management before, and how the customer centricity needs to be in the DNA of the company, of the mission, on the mission level, to understand that, you need to really include everybody in your company in conversations about the customers. You need to have sometimes you need to bring your R&D people to meeting with customers, to engage, to see that the customer is real, that it's not just a persona based on a page that somebody from marketing is telling you about. They're real. The customers are real. The third thing you need to do is make sure your sales force, which is the forefront face to the customer, has good education. You need to educate them about every level of the product. They need to also understand how to build relationships. So those are, tying it back together in a closed loop to make a change and create really customer centricity culture around the customer.
I'll add 3 quick ones as well. I think first off is just get out there. So much of our time is spent in the 4 walls of our office or our building, and getting out there, interacting with customers, whether that's in a B2B context or whether that's at the local mall with your consumers or shopping center. I think getting out there is key. If you're not doing that, then you're not seeing it and feeling it firsthand. The second is to have the experience yourself. Now, that may be harder in some industries than others, but we can all call the call center and try to ask a really tricky, prickly question and see how that experience goes down. We can also, guest purchase or secret shop our own venues, our own channels in which our products are in. And I think doing that gives you a firsthand appreciation for what customers are going through. And then the last one, and it's picking up on I think a theme of what a lot of people are talking about today, is to try to foster community within customer groups. And whether that's building a community yourself, engaging on an existing platform like Reddit or others, but being there and trying to help the community grow and be more vibrant. I think I'm a big believer in karma, and if you do the right thing for your customers, eventually it'll come back to you.
Yeah, I'll add to that. Creating more touch points, getting out there and having more conversations, more types of conversations is definitely great practice. But a tip is to find ways for your team to capture and chronicle and define language. Language is where the culture of a community lives. And you can derive huge insights from different words or phrases that are repeating in the feedback that you're getting. And you can identify some opportunities there. For us at Reddit, for example, I mean, you might see in a lot of the different comments, people say a phrase like, "We did it, Reddit." And that's this moment where their collective action has created a real world result. That's something that they value, and that entire idea lives in that language. So we're very lucky that our platform provides us with the opportunity to be able to go through the comments and see what people have said, and it's automatically captured in the places that they're talking. I would encourage other marketers, other brands to find a way to, capture and document some of the feedback. And if you can go through a process of creating just a word cloud with that, not just a word cloud, but a phrase cloud, or if you have any machine learning that can help you do this at scale, you'll identify what people are saying more than anything else, and then go back to the teams that have been directly engaging with those customers and have a conversation about what some of these words and phrases might mean, or maybe some of the words and phrases that didn't pop on a logical analysis. And there are invariably going to be very, very useful insights encoded in that language.
Fantastic. I hope everyone had a pen and paper writing those down, because those tips were fantastic. Well, actually, the webinar is recorded, so I will be sending it out to everyone shortly. Tomorrow morning, you'll have it in your inbox. That's about all we have time for. So thank you so much to our panelists and to Alan for moderating. What fantastic insights. And also to our audience for joining the webinar and asking such thought-provoking questions. I'm sorry we didn't have time for all of them, but thank you so much. And I hope you can join us at the Insight Marketing Summit on May 14th and 15th in San Diego. My name is Jasmine Keys, and I will be sending out the webinar recordings tomorrow morning. If you have any questions about the summit or would like to see how to get involved, please do reply to that email or ping me a message on LinkedIn. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.